When I met Lisa, she was everything I thought I wanted. Confident, charming, and full of life. She had this magnetic energy, the kind that made people gravitate toward her in a crowded room. Back then, I thought her outgoing nature was one of her best qualities. Now I wasn't so sure. Our marriage wasn't always like this. In the beginning, we were a team, a partnership built on what I thought was mutual respect and love. I worked hard, building my business from the ground up while Lisa brought warmth and charisma to our home. We complemented each other, or so I believed. But over the past year, something shifted. It started small, as these things often do. Lisa became distant. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She'd recently taken on a volunteer project at a local art gallery, and I figured the long hours and new responsibilities were taking their toll. But then there were the late nights, the vague explanations, the half-hearted apologies when she didn't show up for dinner. I remember the first time I asked her about it. It was a Tuesday night, and she'd come home hours after she said she would, her makeup slightly smudged and her hair smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the storm brewing in my chest. "With Alex," she replied casually, tossing her purse onto the couch. "We grabbed drinks after the gallery meeting. I told you about that, didn't I?" She hadn't. I was sure of it. But when I pointed that out, she just rolled her eyes. "You're being paranoid, David. He's just a friend. I don't know why you always jump to conclusions." That became her mantra. "He's just a friend." Every time I asked, every time her stories didn't quite add up, that's what she told me. And every time I tried to believe her. I told myself I was being overly suspicious, that my doubts were a reflection of my insecurities, not her actions. But it was hard to ignore the patterns. The way her phone was always face down on the table. The way she suddenly had meetings or events that never seemed to end when they were supposed to. The way she lit up when she talked about Alex, his sense of humor, his taste in music, his insights into art. One night, I asked her outright, "Lisa, are you seeing someone else?" Her reaction was immediate, and not what I expected. She didn't get defensive or angry. Instead, she laughed. "David, do you even hear yourself? Alex is just a friend. Why would you even think that?" I couldn't tell her why. Not without sounding crazy. But there was something about the way she said his name, the way her eyes softened and her lips curled into a faint smile, that made my stomach twist. Still, I let it go. What else could I do? I didn't have proof, just a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. And Lisa was so good at reassuring me, at making me doubt my own instincts. But the doubts didn't go away. They only grew stronger, especially as her behavior became harder to ignore. She started dressing differently, sleeker, more polished. Her laughter felt more distant, as if she were somewhere else even when we were in the same room. And the intimacy between us? That was the biggest casualty of all. It wasn't just physical. It was in the little things. The way she stopped holding my hand when we walked together. The way she no longer asked about my day or shared hers in return. Our conversations became transactional, reduced to logistics and surface-level pleasantries. I started dreading the nights when she came home late, smelling like someone else's cologne. I hated the mornings when she left early without a goodbye, her phone buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. And most of all, I hated how powerless I felt. I tried to confront her again, this time more directly. "Lisa, I feel like we're drifting apart. Is there something you're not telling me?" Her response was almost pitying. "David, you're imagining things. Maybe you should focus on your work instead of overanalyzing everything I do." Focus on my work. That was her answer to everything. And in a way, she wasn't wrong. My work was the one thing I could control, the one area of my life where I still felt competent. But even that started to suffer under the weight of my doubts and frustrations. By the time Alex became a regular name in our arguments, I'd stopped asking questions. What was the point? Every time I brought him up, it ended the same way, with her accusing me of being insecure, controlling, or paranoid. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but the idea felt too extreme, too final. If I went down that road, there would be no turning back. So instead, I kept my suspicions to myself and tried to focus on the parts of our marriage that still worked, however few they were. But even as I tried to ignore the cracks in our foundation, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was slipping further and further away from me. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to hold on anymore. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being paranoid. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. The night of the party felt like a crossroads before I even walked through the door. I couldn't quite explain it, but there was this weight in the air, as though the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. It wasn't just any party. It was an annual event hosted by one of my business partners, Richard. These gatherings were the epitome of high society, elegant, glittering affairs where everyone seemed to have something to prove. Lisa was unusually enthusiastic about this one. She'd spent days picking out her dress, a sleek black number that hugged her in all the right places. She'd gone to the salon, spent hours on her makeup, and even splurged on a pair of designer heels she'd been eyeing for weeks. Watching her get ready, I was reminded of the woman I fell in love with, the one who could light up a room without trying. But something about her excitement didn't sit right with me. It wasn't for me. And I knew it. As we pulled up to the venue, Lisa's mood was electric. She stepped out of the car, her confidence radiating like a beacon. I followed her inside, my gut already churning with unease. The party was everything you'd expect. Soft music, expensive champagne, and people laughing too loudly at each other's jokes. Lisa disappeared into the crowd almost immediately, a social butterfly fluttering from one conversation to the next. I hung back, sipping my drink and exchanging polite nods with acquaintances. This was her world more than mine, and I'd learned long ago that trying to keep up with her in these settings was a losing battle. And then I saw him. Alex. He was leaning against the bar, his posture casual but commanding. He had that air of someone who knew he was being watched and liked it. His smile was too easy, his laugh too loud, and his gaze was locked onto Lisa. I watched as her face lit up when she saw him, her steps quickening as she made her way over. The way he greeted her, leaning in close, his hand brushing her lower back, made my blood run cold. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to walk over, to interrupt, to remind Alex and Lisa who she'd come with. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of what I'd see up close. Or maybe it was the growing realization that I was the outsider in my own marriage. For the next hour, I kept my distance, but my eyes never left them. They moved around the room together, laughing, talking, their heads bent close in a way that felt far too intimate. Lisa barely looked in my direction, as though I wasn't even there. It was like watching someone else's wife, someone else's life, unfold in front of me. At one point, Richard approached me, his jovial demeanor masking a hint of concern. "Your wife seems to be enjoying herself," he said, nodding toward Lisa and Alex. I forced a smile. She always does. But the words tasted bitter. Enjoying herself. That's what she called it, wasn't it? Just fun, harmless fun with her friend. But there was nothing harmless about the way she looked at him, the way her hand lingered on his arm, the way his gaze followed her every move. The breaking point came later that evening. I had moved closer to the bar, needing something stronger to dull the edges of my frustration. As I waited for my drink, I overheard snippets of their conversation. "You look stunning tonight," Alex said, his voice low and deliberate. Lisa laughed, a soft, melodic sound that used to belong to me. "Stop it. You're going to make David jealous." "Am I?" Alex replied, his tone dripping with mock innocence. He doesn't seem to mind, or maybe he's just used to it by now. My grip tightened around my glass. Used to it? The audacity of his words hit me like a slap, but it was Lisa's response that truly gutted me. She smirked, leaning closer to him. David's harmless. He knows this is just friendly. Friendly. That word again. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest, its blade honed by months of denial and gaslighting. I could feel the stares of others nearby, could hear the murmured whispers that followed wherever Lisa and Alex went. The humiliation was palpable, and for the first time, I felt like I truly didn't belong. Not just at the party, but in her life. When she finally glanced my way, it was almost as an afterthought. Our eyes met across the room, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in hers. Guilt? Concern? Or was it just annoyance that I was still there, watching, waiting? By the time we left the party, my silence was heavy enough to fill the car. Lisa, of course, acted as if nothing was wrong. She chatted about the people she'd seen, the conversations she'd had, her tone light and carefree. It was infuriating. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I saw the way he looked at you, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her response was immediate and unapologetic. And I liked it. What are you going to do about it? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The casual cruelty of them, the way she didn't even bother to deny it. It was the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for months. I stared at her, searching for some sign of remorse, some hint that the woman I married was still in there somewhere. But all I saw was defiance. Nothing, I said finally, my tone as cold as the ache in my chest. I'll let him have you. I only fight for things with value. She didn't reply, and the silence that followed was deafening. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I'd already made up my mind. This wasn't just a rough patch. This wasn't something we could fix with an argument or an apology. This was the end. And deep down, I think Lisa knew it too. The morning after the party, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't peace. No, far from it. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I knew exactly what I had to do. There was no anger, no shouting, no impulsive decisions made in the heat of the moment. Just cold, calculated certainty. Lisa was still asleep when I got up. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, watching her. She looked peaceful, as if she hadn't just shattered everything we'd built together the night before. It was a cruel irony, how someone could look so serene while leaving someone else in pieces. I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, maybe even love. But there was nothing left. She had drained me completely. I went to the office downstairs and sat at my desk, opening my laptop. Over the next few hours, I systematically dismantled every connection we shared. Bank accounts, credit cards, investments. I closed or transferred everything with my name on it. I wasn't going to leave her with a single cent. I wasn't doing this out of spite. It was survival. Lisa had made her choices, and I wasn't going to bankroll her new life with Alex or anyone else. Once the financial ties were severed, I started packing. I didn't take much, just the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. Everything else could stay. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a shell, a place where lies had been carefully cultivated and nurtured. I couldn't live there, not after everything. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't poetic or emotional, just a few lines that said everything I needed to say. You wanted him. Now you have him. Good luck. It was almost noon by the time Lisa woke up and came downstairs. I was sitting on the couch, my bags by the door. She froze when she saw them, her face a mix of confusion and annoyance. "What's this?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I'm leaving," I said simply, not bothering to sugarcoat it. Her eyes narrowed. You're being ridiculous, David. Over one stupid comment at a party? Grow up. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that even surprised me. This isn't about one comment, Lisa. It's about all the lies, the nights you didn't come home, the way you've treated me like a fool while you carried on with Alex or whoever else. Her face darkened. I told you Alex is just a friend. I stood up, grabbing my bags. Spare me. I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. You can keep pretending if it makes you feel better, but I'm done. For a moment, she looked panicked, like she was finally starting to understand what was happening. You're seriously leaving? Just like that? Just like that, I said, my voice calm. I only fight for things with value, Lisa. And you've made it very clear that this marriage doesn't have any. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to find them. I picked up my bags and walked out the door, closing it behind me without looking back. Leaving the house felt surreal. Everything I'd worked for, everything I thought my life was supposed to be was behind that door. And yet, as I drove away, I felt lighter. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was freedom. The weight of Lisa's betrayal, the constant second-guessing, the humiliation. It was all starting to lift. I checked into a hotel that night, using the time alone to figure out my next steps. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Lisa. They started with anger. You're overreacting. You'll regret this. Then they shifted to guilt-tripping. I gave up so much for you and this is how you treat me? Finally, they turned desperate. David, please, we can fix this. I'll do better, I promise. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. Sorry her actions had consequences. Sorry that her safety net was gone. Over the next few days, I started putting my life back together. I rented a small apartment in the city, just enough space for myself. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I focused on work, pouring my energy into the business that had always been my anchor. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but no one pried. For that, I was grateful. Meanwhile, Lisa was falling apart. Mutual friends started calling me, asking what had happened. Lisa's been telling people you abandoned her, one friend said. She's saying you left her with nothing. She's not wrong, I replied. I left her with exactly what she earned. Word spread quickly, and Lisa's carefully curated image began to crumble. Without access to my money, her lifestyle took a hit. The designer clothes, the fancy dinners, the lavish social events, all of it was gone. And with it, so were many of her so-called friends. I heard about her and Alex through the grapevine. It didn't take long for their affair to lose its spark. Without my resources, Lisa wasn't as appealing, and Alex wasn't exactly the knight in shining armor she'd painted him to be. Their relationship became volatile, full of fights and accusations. It was almost poetic in its irony. She'd traded stability for excitement and ended up with neither. One day, Lisa showed up at my office. I wasn't expecting her, but when my assistant buzzed me, I decided to let her in. I was curious, if nothing else. She looked different, tired, worn down. The confident, glamorous woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. David, she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. What do you want, Lisa? She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. I made a mistake, she said finally. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I miss us. I almost laughed. Miss us? You didn't seem to miss us when you were with Alex, or when you were spending my money while lying to my face. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel much of anything. You have no idea what I've been through, she said, her voice breaking. You're right, I replied, and I don't care. You made your bed, Lisa. Now you get to lie in it. She left without another word, And as I watched her walk away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. She'd taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my dignity. But she couldn't take the man I was rebuilding piece by piece. By the time she was gone, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back. It didn't take long for Lisa's fantasy to start unraveling. While I was rebuilding my life, Lisa was discovering that the grass she thought was greener wasn't grass at all. It was artificial turf. The shine of her affair with Alex dulled quickly when faced with the harsh light of reality. A reality I had predicted but didn't stick around to watch. I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends and acquaintances. People love to talk, especially when there's a scandal. "Have you heard about Lisa and Alex?" they'd ask, their voices a mix of curiosity and pity. I didn't press for details, but the stories found their way to me anyway. It wasn't surprising. Lisa's new relationship had started the way most bad relationships do. Built on lies, selfishness, and the thrill of sneaking around. Once that thrill was gone, there was nothing left to hold it together. Alex, as it turned out, wasn't the Prince Charming Lisa had imagined him to be. Without my financial support, her life took a sharp nosedive. The house was mine, the accounts were mine, and every luxury she'd once taken for granted disappeared overnight. Her credit cards were useless, her designer wardrobe suddenly irrelevant when she couldn't afford to maintain the image she'd curated for herself. It didn't help that Alex wasn't exactly a pillar of stability either. He'd been drawn to Lisa because of the lifestyle I'd provided, mistaking her ability to spend money for a reflection of her worth. When that lifestyle evaporated, so did his patience. He wasn't interested in supporting her, not financially, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. I heard about their first big fight from a friend who'd been at the same bar they were in. "It was ugly," he said, shaking his head. He was yelling about how she's nothing without your money, and she stormed out. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I didn't. Lisa's calls and texts became sporadic after that. When she did reach out, it was never to admit she'd been wrong or to take responsibility for her choices. Instead, it was complaints about how hard her life had become. "David," one message read, "you don't understand how much I'm struggling. Alex and I had a fight and I don't know what to do." Another said, "I need help. I made a mistake and everything is falling apart. Please, can we talk?" I didn't reply to any of them. What was the point? Lisa wasn't looking for closure or reconciliation. She was looking for a lifeline, a way to crawl back to the comfort she'd so carelessly discarded. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't her safety net, her backup plan, her doormat. As weeks turned into months, Lisa's situation only worsened. I heard she'd moved out of the small apartment she'd shared with Alex after he'd finally had enough and kicked her out. Apparently their fights had escalated, with Alex blaming her for dragging him into a life of financial instability and Lisa accusing him of using her. Both were probably right. One of her friends, someone I barely knew, called me one afternoon. "David, I don't know if you care, but Lisa's not doing well," she said, her voice hesitant. "She's staying on someone's couch and barely getting by. Maybe you should talk to her." "Why?" I asked flatly. "She made her choices. Let her deal with them." The friend didn't argue, and I appreciated that. I wasn't interested in playing the role of savior, not for Lisa. She'd made it clear that I wasn't enough for her when it mattered. Now she was finding out that the life she'd thought she wanted came with a price she couldn't afford. What I found fascinating, in a darkly ironic way, was how Alex's behavior mirrored Lisa's. Just as she'd taken me for granted, assuming I'd always be there no matter what, Alex had done the same to her. He thought he could live off the remnants of her old life without contributing anything of value himself. When it became clear that wasn't possible, he turned on her, revealing the kind of man he truly was: shallow, selfish, and quick to blame anyone but himself. Lisa, for all her flaws, wasn't stupid. She must have seen the parallels. I wondered if she ever thought about how she'd treated me when Alex was berating her for not being the woman he thought she was. I wondered if she recognized the irony when she realized she'd traded a stable, loving relationship for a man who cared more about appearances than substance. One night, I got a message from Lisa that was different from the others. It was longer, more introspective, almost like a journal entry she hadn't meant to send. David, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I can't stop thinking about what I did to us. Alex was never what I thought he was, and I see now how blind I was. I threw away something good, something real, for nothing. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just needed to say that I'm sorry. Truly. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before setting my phone down. There was no anger in her words, no excuses, no attempts to shift the blame. For the first time, Lisa sounded like someone who understood the weight of her choices. But I didn't reply. Not because I was still angry. By that point, I wasn't. I'd moved past the anger, the hurt, the bitterness. I didn't reply because it didn't matter. Lisa's apology, heartfelt as it might have been, couldn't change the past. It couldn't undo the damage or erase the betrayal. And it couldn't bring me back to a place where I wanted her in my life. The reality of her affair wasn't just that it had failed. It was that it had revealed the truth about both of us. Lisa had been chasing something that didn't exist, a fantasy of freedom and excitement that crumbled under the weight of real life. And I'd been holding on to someone who wasn't capable of valuing what we had. In the end, the affair wasn't the cause of our downfall. It was the symptom of something deeper, something broken that we'd both ignored for too long. And as painful as it was, I was grateful for the clarity it brought. Because now, for the first time, I could see the path forward, and it didn't include Lisa. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Walking away from Lisa and everything tied to her felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing where I'd land. But in that uncertainty, I found a strange kind of freedom. For the first time in years, my life was mine to shape, unburdened by her lies or my lingering doubts. The first few weeks were the hardest. The silence in my new apartment was deafening, a constant reminder of what I'd left behind. The little routines we'd shared, Sunday mornings with coffee, late-night movies on the couch, were suddenly replaced by an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. But over time, I realized that emptiness wasn't a void. It was a blank canvas. I poured myself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to regain control. My company had always been my anchor, the one thing I could rely on when everything else felt unstable. Now it became the foundation for my new life. I spent long hours at the office, not out of necessity, but because I wanted to build something that was entirely mine. Free from Lisa's shadow. But it wasn't all about work. I began reconnecting with parts of myself I'd forgotten. I started going to the gym regularly, rediscovering the physical strength I'd neglected during the tail end of my marriage. Each session felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was capable of growth, of pushing through pain and coming out stronger. I also reached out to old friends, people I'd lost touch with over the years. At first, I was hesitant. What would I say? How would I explain what had happened? But as I opened up, I realized I wasn't alone. Many of them had their own stories of heartbreak and resilience, and their support became a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. One friend, Tom, convinced me to join a hiking group he was part of. At first, I wasn't sure it was my thing. I wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type. But on my first hike, standing at the top of a trail and looking out over miles of unspoiled landscape, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. There was something humbling about the mountains, their quiet strength and unyielding presence. It reminded me that life goes on no matter how broken you feel. In the midst of all this rebuilding, I started to think about what I really wanted. Not just in a relationship, but in life. Lisa had consumed so much of my energy, my focus, my identity. Without her, I was finally free to figure out who I was and what made me happy. I began trying new things, Cooking classes, photography, even learning to play the guitar. Some of it stuck, some didn't. But it all helped me grow. And then, there was Rachel. I met her at a networking event I almost didn't attend. She was standing by the refreshment table, looking slightly out of place but undeniably radiant. There was nothing flashy about her. No dramatic entrances or over-the-top charisma like Lisa. Rachel's presence was quieter, steadier, but it drew me in nonetheless. We struck up a conversation, and I was struck by how genuine she was. She didn't try to impress me or dominate the conversation. She simply listened, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own experiences with an honesty that felt refreshing. It wasn't love at first sight, nothing so dramatic. But there was a connection, one that grew stronger with every interaction. Rachel and I started seeing each other casually at first. Dinners, hikes, the occasional movie night. It wasn't about replacing Lisa or rushing into anything serious. It was about finding someone who valued me for who I was, someone who saw me as an equal rather than a stepping stone or a safety net. One night, as we sat on a park bench watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Rachel turned to me and said something that stayed with me. "You've been through a lot, but it doesn't define you. You're more than your past, David." She was right. My time with Lisa, as painful as it had been, didn't define me. It was a chapter in my story, not the whole book. And now, with Rachel by my side, I was ready to start writing the next one. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Not just about love, but about life. I'd lost so much, but in the process, I'd found something far more valuable. Myself. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything I'd left behind. I wasn't surprised to hear that Lisa's life had taken a nosedive after I left. To be honest, I didn't relish the thought of her suffering. I'm not that kind of person. But I also couldn't deny the grim satisfaction of knowing she was finally experiencing the consequences of her choices. Choices she made freely, without regard for what they would cost. The whispers started small, snippets of gossip passed along by mutual acquaintances. "Lisa's been couch surfing," one friend mentioned over coffee. "She and Alex broke up and she's struggling to keep it together." Another said, "She called me the other night crying. I've never heard her sound so lost." At first I shrugged it off. It wasn't my problem anymore. Lisa had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But the stories kept coming, painting a picture of a woman unraveling under the weight of her own decisions. The breakup with Alex had apparently been brutal. Their relationship, built on deceit and the allure of something forbidden, couldn't survive the reality of financial hardship. Without my money to cushion her lifestyle, Lisa became a liability rather than an asset in Alex's eyes. The fights grew louder, the blame more pointed. According to what I heard, he called her out for being nothing without David's money, a cutting reminder of what she'd thrown away. Lisa, for her part, tried to stand her ground. But it's hard to argue when the truth is staring you in the face. She was left with no home, no income, and no support system. The friends who'd once flocked to her side at parties and events suddenly seemed too busy to return her calls. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from an old mutual friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "David," she began hesitantly, "I thought you should know. Lisa's really struggling. She's staying with a friend, but it's not a stable situation. She's not in a good place." I listened, silent, as she detailed the latest chapter in Lisa's downfall. The debt piling up, the nights spent crying over what she'd lost, the growing realization that Alex had never cared about her the way she thought he did. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked when she finished. "I don't know," the friend admitted. "Maybe just reach out? She seems so lost." Lost. That was an understatement. Lisa had been lost for a long time. Long before Alex, long before the party, maybe even long before our marriage. But it wasn't my job to find her anymore. I told the friend as much, politely but firmly. "I've moved on," I said. Lisa needs to figure this out on her own. Despite the calls, the gossip, and the lingering reminders of what we once had, I didn't dwell on Lisa's situation. My focus was on building a better life, one that wasn't tethered to the wreckage of our marriage. But as the months passed, I couldn't help but reflect on the lessons this whole ordeal had taught me. The first lesson was one of self-worth. For years, I had allowed Lisa's opinions, actions, and approval to define how I saw myself. I'd bent over backward to make her happy, to meet her expectations, to prove that I was enough. But the truth was, I'd always been enough. I just hadn't realized it until she was gone. I also learned that love isn't about convenience or appearances. It's about trust, respect, and mutual effort. Lisa had loved the idea of me, the stability and success I represented. But she hadn't truly loved me, not in the way that mattered. And maybe deep down, I hadn't truly loved her either. I'd loved the version of her I wanted to believe in, not the person she actually was. Another lesson was the importance of boundaries. I'd ignored my instincts for far too long, letting Lisa's charm and excuses override the doubts that gnawed at me. If I'd set firmer boundaries early on, maybe things would have turned out differently. Or maybe they wouldn't have, but at least I wouldn't have wasted so much time doubting myself. Lisa tried to contact me one last time. This time, it wasn't a call or a text. It was a letter, handwritten and delivered to my office. I opened it, half expecting another round of apologies or pleas for help. But what I found was something else entirely. David, it began. I don't know if you'll even read this, but I need to say these things, even if they don't reach you. I've made so many mistakes, and I've lost so much. But the biggest mistake was losing you. Not because of what you provided, but because of who you are. I didn't see it then, but you deserved so much better than the person I was. I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, the betrayal, the way I took you for granted. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. I just hope you find happiness, because you gave me so much of it, even when I didn't appreciate it.